I'm very pleased to be part of this gathering tonight. And I'm very pleased also, after the short video presentation of our center, to say that I'm part of this network and this process of KAICIID. And I'm not just saying a center for dialogue, as it is well known, but also I would like to call this a journey for dialogue, a place where we find ourselves networking and joining others in different fields for one goal: coming to know the other better for a better and peaceful world of tomorrow. Almost 3 years ago, I was part of a delegation that attended the encounter of Pope Francis, the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, and Archbishop Hieronymus of Athens when they visited the island of Lesbos. And this was in order to raise awareness of the emergency and the dangerous situation of migrants crossing the Mediterranean. I am convinced that this event exemplifies the type of commitment religious leaders should promote. The joint declaration signed on April 16, 2016 stated, I quote, "Our meeting today is meant to help bring courage and hope to those seeking refuge and to all those who welcome and assist them. We urge the international community to make the protection of human lives a priority and at every level to support inclusive policies which extend to all religious communities." If we just think that after the war in the Middle East, and especially in Iraq and Syria, we've had millions of people who lost their lives, who fled and are misplaced in these countries, and who moved. There are still about 3 million actually in Turkey, over probably 2 million in Western Europe, and some thousands who never made it to cross the coast from Turkey to Greece. And among them, children who never had the opportunity to grow and to be part of this world. Having said that, meetings, joint declarations, and photo opportunities are a starting point, but they are not enough because we will be judged by what comes after. In technical terms, we call that follow-up. And in more religious terms, we mean the capacity of religious actors, religious leaders, to not only be part of an inclusive solution, but also to inspire and transform, to inspire hope and trust among immigrants and refugees especially when they are young, and to transform the biases and prejudices of the people along migratory paths from the countries of origin to the countries of destination. I became even more convinced of this after my visit to a refugee camp that day in the island of Lesbos, where so many children and families were gathered. And I will never forget the eyes of the children behind a fence looking at us. Too often, children on the move are treated as isolated from their family, and the negative impact on children's rights of laws, policies, and practices that target adults tends to be ignored. It is our spiritual duty and our role to speak up for children's rights and on migrant and refugees issues. And I firmly believe that today's launch event of Network for Dialogue is really empowering interreligious and international action for social inclusion of refugees and migrants here in Bologna. And it's a crucial step towards a more inclusive solution to one of the world humanitarian crises, probably the worst after the World War II, Second World War II. What interreligious communities and religious leaders, especially in Europe, are doing to support the integration of refugees and especially the youth, I would say that they are doing a lot, from international conferences to raising awareness of difficulties these young people face. Still, in my opinion, based on my modest experience, I believe that religious actors and faith-based organizations can foster better inclusion of migrants and refugees. And I will give you 3 examples. When a new immigrant arrives, necessarily he needs to communicate. And there is a barrier. There is a barrier of the language. We need to overcome that. And there comes education. We, as faith-based organizations, can also help to contact other local associations. And I would like to emphasize the role of mediation that the religion can play. And this is why it is essential that the religious communities promote what Antonio Gramsci calls organic intellectuals, meaning people who are able to build bridges between the religious communities and surrounding society. And also, faith-based organizations can help to show that the migrants' culture of origin and the receiving society are compatible. This is where I see the importance that interreligious dialogue can play as a means to respond to the biases and prejudices and to promote peace through social inclusion. That, of course, will require a willingness to meet, to speak, and to interact. I said earlier that interreligious dialogue is a process. It's an open-ended process. And all of us that we are engaged in this dialogue, we are definitely on the same boat with our differences, with our different traditions, but we should contribute all together to a better understanding of the other by rehumanizing the other and thus promoting human dignity and security. Otherness is an item connected to migration, and it is a perception based on alterity. The imagined other is often part of a narrative in which the definition of oneself comes with limits and borders. They produce identity as a phenomenon which resists changes. And this fact is complicated enough to be explained and interpreted for young people. Speaking about identity or even multiple identities remains a taboo in many societies because it goes against the great ground narrative of many nation states and base the concept national identity of the grand national narrative. However, globalization continues to challenge the ethno-national model, and it exposes us to ethnic, religious, and cultural otherness to a degree never before seen in the history of the world. The philosopher Gilles Deleuze once wrote that otherness brings something incomprehensible into the world. Otherness does not start with the other. It starts with ourselves, with the many layers of identity that make a person unique. And it is a learning process and inclusion that is this method. Let me give an example. The humanitarian crisis of migrants in Greece happens on the top of its worst ever economic crisis. However, the broader problem of migration facing Europe is not only caused by flows from the Middle East, but also from the turmoil in the Horn of Africa, the instability and frequent civil wars in the Sahel region, as well as the region's desertification. Similarly, the extensive destabilization of a large geopolitical zone from the Turkish border to the fringes of North Africa constitute a whole spectrum of reasons behind a long-term reality which is very difficult to change, meaning that migration is expected to exist as a continual challenge for the West on a strategic scale. In this context, we should acknowledge the extraordinary initiatives taken by the Church, and especially by the Orthodox Church in Greece, and the Church of Greece, but also the Ecumenical Patriarchate to tackle this issue. Today, we need more synergies, not only between churches, on an inter-Orthodox or ecumenical level, or even between religious communities. We need better cooperation between religions and international organizations on a global level. We should put more emphasis on how to train the people who will care for and welcome the migrants. The interreligious dimension of this training, including mediation and facilitation, should become mandatory. And we should also make sure that migrants can freely practice their own religion in their new home. As you all know, interreligious dialogue is crucial for the churches. especially for the Orthodox Church, as we read in the encyclical of the Great and Holy Council in 2016, honest interfaith dialogue contributes to the development of mutual trust and to the promotion of peace and reconciliation. The Church strives to make the peace from on high more tangibly felt on earth. True peace is not achieved by force or arms, but only through love that does not seek its own, and the oil of faith must be used to soothe and heal the wounds of others and not to rekindle new fires of hatred. End of quote. The Orthodox Church is dedicated to a sustained dialogue with other Christians in other religions. Dialogue in the Orthodox understanding is especially and primarily a dialogue between God and humanity. It is initiated by God and is literally through the Logos, the Logos. Dialogue takes form in all our social encounters, from the family to the political, but it is also found in the encounter with those who are religiously different from us, whether Christian or non-Christian. For Orthodox Christians living in non-Orthodox countries, interreligious encounters and dialogue are and will continue to be important means through which respect for religious differences and proclamation of the truth are realized. Interreligious dialogue is not only about finding common ground or identifying areas of commonalities. It is also an encounter with the other on a personal and human level. Encounter and dialogue require risk both at the level of the person as well as of the community. And all dialogue is personal, since it involves the interaction of unique and irreplaceable persons. Christian or not, whose personhood is intrinsically connected to their individual social, cultural, and religious histories. The opposition to interreligious dialogue usually comes from fear and a lack of knowledge or exposure to religious diversity. Interreligious dialogue recognizes the differences of religious traditions and promotes peaceful coexistence and cooperation between peoples and cultures. Interreligious dialogue does not mean to deny one's own faith, but rather to change one's mind or attitude towards the other. It's a real sense of metanoia, the change of the nous, the change of the way that we think and act. So it can also heal and disperse prejudices and contribute to a mutual comprehension and the pacific resolution of conflicts. Biases and prejudices come from the misinterpretation of religion. And this is why interreligious dialogue can chase away fear and suspicion. It is central for peace, but only in the spirit of inclusion, mutual confidence, and respect. Dialogue defines our relationship to the world, but also to God. And dialogue should be identical to communion according to Christian Orthodox theology. In other words, dialogue allowed me first to deepen the meaning of humanity. What does it mean to be a human? To depend on the other, to see the sign of the divine in the other. B, to oppose my own prejudices and to help others inside and outside of my own community to be more inclusive and tolerant. C, to understand that dialogue is a learning process. And I mean by that, you should know that to really doing dialogue where you start meeting people and allowing them to see you as you are and allowing yourselves to see them as they are. Humans with a part of mystery that is also the sign of the divine. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome all of you tonight, the participants of the Conference of the European Academy of Religion, and also our KAICIID delegation, and all of you, the members of the press. And I'm extremely grateful to the organizers of this event for giving me the opportunity to speak and to reflect on the very crucial issue of migration and inclusion, since I'm convinced that a network of grassroots faith-based organizations can provide recommendations for policymakers that will allow the active use of interreligious dialogue with refugees and migrants. Having faith-based organizations and secular organizations working together in the field of dialogue for the common aim of social inclusion of refugees and migrants is not only necessary, but it is definitely essential. Considering how religion can promote social inclusion, and justice highlights another commitment that we should pursue. We cannot separate our concern for human dignity, human rights, or social justice from our concern for peace and sustainability. These concerns are closely linked, and if we value each individual, migrants and refugees, or not, may, in the image of God, and value every particle of God's creation, then we must also care for each other and for our own world. The ecological problem of pollution is also connected to the social problem of poverty. So all ecological activity is ultimately measured and properly judged by its impact and effects upon other people, and especially the poor. The environmental issue is closely related to our topic today, and in fact, climate change will be in the near future, if it is not already probably the case, of impact more and more of migration flows related to geopolitical conflicts. Our answer should be comprehensive and global. The collective action of believers will apply pressure on world leaders and global decision makers. Sobriety will respond to the appetites of consumerism, and sharing will limit inequality. Finally, charity encompasses the political and the social sphere. Through prayer and commitment, we can be led to a new life, to the possibility of a more inclusive, just, and peaceful society. Thank you very much.